Tycoon abandoned his wife, leaving her and 3 children without support in her research. In the heart of the kingdom stood the sprawling Royal Academy, its ivory spires piercing the clouds. But our story did not begin there. No, it began further down the stone-paved roads, within the rose-covered halls of the Eastern Manor, home to a woman who did not belong to the past nor the present, but to something the world had not yet understood. Her name was Lady Alenia. She stood alone in the library, surrounded by shelves stacked with scrolls, sketches, and fragments of old alchemical theories. Her hands, smudged with ink and ash, trembled as they carefully adjusted the copper tubing of a handmade device on the table before her. Her dark brown hair was tied loosely, strands falling across her face as she bent closer to the flame. Her eyes, amber and endlessly deep, flickered with determination. "It must work this time," she whispered, barely loud enough for the wind to hear. Behind her, tiny footsteps echoed across the stone floor. "Mother?" said a small voice. Alenia turned swiftly, her expression softening. There stood her eldest, Layran, just 7 winters old, holding his little sister Era's hand. Both had the same quiet warmth in their eyes, Darius' eyes, but none of his cruelty. The baby, Elin, cooed softly in her sling across Alenia's chest. "Why aren't you in bed?" she asked gently. Layran shuffled. "We heard something explode." Alenia let out a quiet laugh, brushing ash off her apron. "Nothing exploded." "Well, maybe a little." The children giggled, and for a moment, the burdens of war, class, and rejection faded from her mind. But it was only for a moment. Alenia helped her children back to their chamber, kissing their foreheads one by one. When she returned to her desk, her smile slowly faded. Her thoughts returned to the device, her invention, a distillation apparatus unlike anything the kingdom had seen. If completed, it would allow medicine to be extracted faster, purer, and cheaper. It could change the fate of the common people, save children from fevers, heal wounds without costly herbs. It could change everything. But no one believed her. No one but him, Darius. She glanced at the carved wooden chair across from her, once occupied by her husband. He had sat there every evening, listening as she read from ancient tomes and shared her visions. In those days, his smile had seemed genuine. He had brought her wildflowers and whispered that she was the brightest star in a sky full of noble shadows. She had loved him. She had trusted him. Even when the whispers began, that he had eyes for the noblewoman Elise of House Valent, that he found Alenia's studies unseemly for a lady of her rank. She pushed the thoughts away. He was under pressure, she told herself. The court demanded charm and profit, not gears and glass. He was trying to protect their family. But lately, he had become distant, cold, absent. The last time they had spoken at length, he had stood on the balcony as she pleaded with him to attend her presentation before the Council of Scholars. "They won't take you seriously, Alenia," he said, his arms crossed. "You don't belong in their world." "I don't belong?" Her voice had cracked, almost against her will. "Darius, they need to see what I've built. This could help. You're a noblewoman, not an alchemist. You have 3 children. Do you think they respect you for playing with fire and iron?" "I'm not playing," she shouted, then winced, afraid the children would wake. Her voice dropped to a whisper, desperate and trembling. "I am building something that could save lives. I'm not asking you to believe in the science. I'm asking you to believe in me." Darius hadn't answered. He simply turned away, his silhouette dissolving into the shadows. That night, as Alenia tried to sleep, a strange silence settled over the manor. Not the kind of silence that comforts, but the kind that warns. When she awoke the next morning, Darius was gone. No farewell, no kiss on the forehead of his children. Just a letter folded precisely on the edge of the table. "You chose your path. I must choose mine. I can no longer stand beside a woman who refuses to know her place. The court has no room for dreamers, Alenia. I go where there is honor, future, and truth. You are not part of that future." For a long time, Alenia didn't move. Then, with shaking hands, She burned the letter in the flame of her unfinished invention. Outside, the bells of Eldoria rang in the new day. Inside, a woman stood surrounded by ash, her heart cracked, but not broken. And somewhere deep within her, beneath the ache and the shame and the betrayal, something new began to awaken. Resolve. This was the day Lady Alenia stopped being the forgotten wife of a rising noble, and began to become the legend history would one day remember. In the manor once full of warmth, now only silence remained. The laughter of children still echoed faintly through its halls, but even the walls seemed to understand that something vital had been torn away. Alenia moved like a ghost. She spoke gently, smiled when necessary, tucked her children in each night. But behind her eyes lived a storm that would not calm. The nobles of Eldoria were swift and merciless. News of Darius' departure spread faster than wildfire on parchment. Some whispered that he had escaped a madwoman. Others said she'd been abandoned for her arrogance. None asked how she was surviving. No one offered aid. The servants, paid by Darius' estate, left one by one. The funds he had promised her vanished. The once glorious manor began to rot at the edges, and with it, the illusion of her place in that world. On the 6th night after his disappearance, Alenia sat at her desk, the children asleep upstairs, the candlelight casting trembling shadows across the room. She stared at the copper wires, the scorched parchment, the delicate glass tubes she could no longer afford to replace. Her invention lay dormant, incomplete. She closed her eyes, biting her lip until she tasted blood. "Why did you lie to me?" she whispered aloud to the empty chair opposite her. "Why did you say you loved me? If you only wanted my name?" A wind pushed the window open, scattering her notes. She didn't move, only stared. Suddenly, Laran's voice called out from the staircase, soft and hesitant. "Mother!" She turned quickly, hiding the tears from her cheeks. "Go back to sleep, darling. It's very late." But he didn't. The boy stepped forward, carrying in his tiny hands a broken wooden horse. "It's Elend's," she cried when it broke. Alenia knelt and took it gently, examining the snapped leg. She blinked hard, keeping her hands steady. "I'll fix it," she said, forcing a smile. "Just like everything else." "Is father coming back?" he asked then, so suddenly, so innocently, that her chest tightened. She wanted to scream, to cry, to tell him that his father had chosen gold over family, ambition over love, that he had walked away not just from her, but from them, their children, his own blood. But she didn't. Instead, she reached out and held her son close. "I don't think so," she whispered. He didn't respond. He just leaned his head against her shoulder, and for a while, they stayed like that, two fragile figures holding each other in the eye of a storm. The next morning, she rose before dawn. She packed what few valuables remained: a silver comb from her wedding, the embroidered gowns she wore at court, and her father's last book of mechanical theories. Then she woke the children gently, wrapped them in cloaks, and left the manor for the last time. As they walked through the empty halls, Alenia didn't look back. She didn't need to. That place was no longer a home. It had become a coffin of lost trust, buried dreams, and hollow promises. The journey to the outskirts of the kingdom took 3 days on foot. They slept in abandoned barns, ate dried fruit and cold bread, and followed the winding roads away from the world that had turned its back on them. By the 4th day, they arrived in a village so small it didn't appear on most maps. Nestled between the woods and the cliffs by the southern sea, the place smelled of brine and firewood. The people there did not wear silks or speak of courtly games. They wore rough linen and spoke with honesty, sometimes cruel, but never false. A woman named Morella took them in, a widow with a wrinkled face, eyes sharp as knives, and a heart made of soft wool hidden beneath years of dirt and grief. "You don't look like you belong here," she said, eyeing Alenia's hands, pale and soft, yet blistered now from the road. "I don't," Alenia replied quietly, "but I have nowhere else to go." Morella looked at the 3 children. Era clung to her mother's skirt. Elend whimpered, tired and cold. Laran stood tall, protective despite his trembling hands. "You're a fool," Mirella muttered, "but I've always had a soft spot for fools with fire in their eyes." And so they stayed. The cottage was small, damp, the roof leaked, the floor creaked, and there was barely enough space for four. But it was shelter. Elenia worked in the apothecary during the day, crushing herbs, measuring powders, learning how to heal not from books, but from the old women who had cured ailments long before physicians had their titles. At night, when the village slept, she lit her candle again. Her fingers, though raw, moved with precision as she redrew the diagrams from memory. No copper tubing, no rare minerals, but she would find a way. She always did. One night, as thunder rolled across the cliffs, she sat at the workbench Mirella had let her carve from an old door. Leyran was asleep beside the fire, the girls curled together under quilts. She stared at the newest sketch, a simplified version of her old design. Less elegant, more practical. She traced it slowly. "Maybe," she murmured, "this is how it was always meant to be." Just then, a sudden knock echoed on the cottage door. Startled, she froze. No one knocked after dark. No one dared. Another knock, firmer, then a voice. "Lady Elenia of House Dareth, open the door." Her heart dropped. She stood, her fingers clutching the edge of the table. "I am no lady anymore," she said aloud. The knock came again. When she opened the door, 2 armored guards stood under the rain. "We come with orders from the royal court," the taller one said. "Your husband has been named advisor to the crown. You are to relinquish any property bearing the Dareth crest. Effective immediately." Her blood turned to ice. He had risen, just as he'd planned. She looked past the guards into the darkness, and something inside her, something old and buried, cracked. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply shut the door and locked it. She turned, picked up her pencil, and went back to her work. Because while Darius chased crowns and empty power, Elenia would build something no king could steal. Something that would outlive all of them. Elenia sat alone at the edge of her makeshift work table, a strip of linen tied around her wrist to keep the burn from worsening. Hours had passed since the royal guards had delivered their message. A message not of justice, but of erasure. Darius had climbed higher by pressing her lower. He was severing her from every part of her identity, beginning with her name, her land, her past. She exhaled slowly. Her hands were shaking. Across the room, the children slept again, too young to understand the weight of the words spoken at that door, too innocent to realize their father was not just gone. He was turning them invisible, one decree at a time. Elenia clenched her jaw, pulling the candle closer. Her newest drawing lay on the table, a more compact version of the original distiller, stripped of aesthetic but full of potential. She had adapted the blueprint to use only the most accessible materials: carved wood, clay piping, and animal hide to create pressure seals. Crude, but possibly effective. She reached for the tin box of scraps Mirella had brought her from the town's market. Broken scissors, rusted nails, pieces of mirror, a bent ladle. Nothing beautiful, but each item, to Elenia, shimmered with potential. She was still sorting the pieces when she heard the coughing. A deep, rough sound, jagged and wet. Her head shot up. It was Leyran. He lay by the hearth, his small frame trembling. The cough tore through him again, followed by a sound no mother ever wanted to hear. That breathless, gasping whimper. The kind that came not from discomfort, but from true pain. She was at his side in an instant. "Leyran?" she whispered, brushing the damp hair from his face. "What is it, my love? What's hurting?" He didn't answer. His eyes were glossy, unfocused. She pressed her hand to his forehead. "Fire. Gods?" She scooped him into her arms, calling out, "Mirella, I need help." Within seconds, the older woman stormed into the room, robes half-wrapped, her feet bare on the cold floor. "What is it?" "Fever. He's burning up." Mirella crouched beside her, feeling the boy's neck and chest. "His lungs. Listen to that wheeze. This is no cold. It's in deep already." Elenia's heart pounded. "Tell me what to do." Marella hesitated. There's a moss that can help, but it's rare this time of year. You'll need to go before dawn. North side of the cliffs, where the sea wind doesn't touch. I'll go now. No, you won't, Marella snapped. You don't know those cliffs in the dark. I'll go. You stay here. And then, softer, almost kindly, you're his mother. He needs to see your face when he wakes. Elenia nodded, swallowing the cry building in her throat. When Marella left, Elenia returned to her son's side. She soaked cloth in cool water and placed it on his forehead, whispering lullabies she hadn't sung since he was a baby. But the fever didn't break. Instead, he began to mutter in his sleep, half-formed sentences, fragments of fear and pain. She held him tighter. I should have found the cure already, she whispered into his hair. I should have worked faster. I should have. And then, as tears began to fall down her cheeks, she said the one thing she had never dared speak aloud. If you die, I won't survive it. The storm outside raged on. Hours passed. She began flipping through her notes, frantic. The formulas, the pressure systems, the heat thresholds. What if she was missing something? What if the answer had been in front of her the whole time? Her eyes landed on a diagram, an older one she had abandoned months ago, a prototype of the distiller with a focus not on extraction, but on infusion. The concept had been too unstable to pursue, but now, her hand trembled as she lit the second candle and began drawing. She worked through the night. She tore apart the broken ladle and reshaped it over the fire. She cut her hands twisting wire, bruised her knees on the floor, cursed under her breath and pleaded with the universe under her breathless tears. By dawn, she had something. It was crude, ugly even, but it worked. She tested it on a dried bundle of winterleaf, an herb known to reduce inflammation. The scent that rose was sharp and bitter, but she bottled the liquid all the same, mixing it with 2 drops of heated water and the last of the honey Marella had given her. She turned to Layran, whose skin was ghost pale now, his lips dry and cracked. Please, she whispered, let this be enough. She tipped the spoon to his lips. The first drop barely touched his tongue before he groaned, weakly, and tried to turn away. Just a little, she begged. Just enough for the fever to see you're not giving up. Somehow he swallowed. She held him in her arms for the next hour, humming, praying. And then, the color began to return to his face. His breath, though shallow, began to steady. And as the morning sun broke through the storm clouds, Laran's eyes fluttered open. He blinked up at her, dazed. Mama, she laughed. A broken, disbelieving sound, and kissed his forehead again and again. Yes, my love, I'm here. When Marella returned shortly after, soaked and muddy, she found Elenia still holding her son, the device humming faintly on the table, still warm from its first use. The old woman paused in the doorway, her eyes flicking from mother to child, from the half-finished machine to the wild, grateful tears on Elenia's face. You did it, she said softly. Elenia didn't look up. She only whispered, almost to herself, no one else will suffer like this if I can stop it. And from that moment on, the woman the world had tried to forget became something else entirely. A healer, a scientist, a mother whose love burned brighter than any crown. The bitter frost of winter had melted into the wet bloom of spring, and though the air smelled of earth and rebirth, a quiet storm brewed beneath the surface of her days. The village had changed. Whispers followed her now, some reverent, others full of suspicion. They called her Witch of the West Cliffs. Some said she had bargained with shadows to save her child. Others said she had returned from exile with forbidden knowledge. A few came to her door in secret, clutching sick infants, old wounds, or broken limbs. She healed them all, asking nothing in return but silence. But silence never lasted long in Eldoria. One afternoon, as she ground herbs in her mortar by the fire, Marella entered, breathless. They're coming, she said, slamming the door behind her. Elenia looked up. Her hands froze. Who? Marella moved to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough for one weathered eye to peek through. Soldiers, 4 of them, the king's crest on their sleeves. Elenia felt the blood drain from her face. Darius sent them, she murmured. He must have heard. Heard what? That I'm still alive. That I didn't disappear. Morella turned to her. You saved your son's life. You've saved half the village since then. You have nothing to hide. I have everything to hide, Elenia said through clenched teeth. My children, my work. They don't want me cured, Morella. They want me erased. The children began to stir in the other room. She heard Era's tiny voice, sleepy and sweet. Is someone knocking, Mama? Elenia's breath caught. I need to hide them. No, Morella said firmly. You won't run. Not this time. The knock came, as if on cue, sharp, deliberate, echoing with authority. Elenia stepped forward, heart pounding. She opened the door. The soldiers stood tall, armored in black and steel. The one at the front held a scroll sealed with the crimson wax of the crown. Lady Elenia of House Dareth, he read, you are hereby summoned to the royal city of Valenfort, under orders of His Majesty's Council of Advancement and Research. You are to present your healing methods and devices for review. She blinked, stunned. Not arrested, not threatened, summoned. For research? She repeated slowly. The man nodded once. The court has heard of a cure spreading through the western region. Fever that once claimed dozens now disappears within hours. Rumor says it began with a woman thought dead. Elenia glanced at Morella, whose face was unreadable. Refusal to comply will be interpreted as treason, the soldier added. Treason, of course. She took the scroll with trembling fingers. The wax cracked beneath her thumb. Her eyes scanned the message, reading each line twice. Not a request, not an opportunity, a trap in the shape of a stage. You will leave in 3 days, the soldier finished. You may bring your family, or not. Then he turned, and they rode off, their black horses stirring dust in the wind. That night, she sat by the hearth, the scroll unopened beside her. The children slept soundly, unaware of the war brewing beneath their mother's silence. Morella poured 2 cups of bitterroot tea and sat opposite her. They want your invention, she said, but they want it without you. I know. You can go. Show them. Let them see you. Elenia shook her head. They won't see me. They'll see a woman who became too dangerous to ignore. Morella leaned forward. Then be dangerous. Be impossible to ignore. The words struck her like an arrow through the ribs. Dangerous. She had never wanted to be dangerous, but she had wanted to be heard. She rose slowly, went to the back room, and returned with the small copper and wood device that had saved Laran's life. She placed it on the table between them. I'll go, she said softly. Morella raised an eyebrow. But I'll go on my terms. In the days that followed, Elenia prepared everything. She cleaned the machine, rewrote her notes, and taught Laran how to replicate her measurements by hand, just in case. She spoke to the children in gentle tones, told them they would be visiting a place full of tall towers and shiny carriages, and they clapped their hands, unaware of what truly waited. And on the morning of their departure, Morella helped them load the small cart. You look like your mother, Morella told Laran, tying his cloak. Is that good? The boy asked. Morella smiled, her eyes shining. It's the best thing a boy could hope for. Elenia stood at the edge of the road, her eyes fixed on the path that led east, toward the capital. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from something else. Resolve. She would not be the woman begging at a locked door. She would not be the forgotten name behind a powerful man's rise. Not anymore. This time, she would walk into the heart of the kingdom with her head high, and make sure the world remembered who she was. Rain soaked the road for 3 days straight, turning the dirt path into a winding trail of thick mud that clung to the wheels of their small cart. The children huddled under blankets in the back, their eyes wide with awe every time a hawk flew overhead or a village appeared in the distance. But Elenia barely noticed the landscape. Her mind was elsewhere, tangled in the storm of what lay ahead. At night, when the children were asleep beside the crackling fire, she sat alone, scribbling revisions to her notes, tightening the copper bands on her device, whispering formulas under her breath like a prayer she couldn't afford to forget. Morella's last words haunted her. Be impossible to ignore, but what if they didn't listen at all? What if they saw only the title Darius had gifted her with? A dreamer out of place. What if she stood in front of them with everything she had created and they laughed? It wasn't pride she feared losing, it was the chance to matter, to change something, to prove that a woman's mind could build more than dresses and babies. And somewhere deeper, quieter, she feared what she would become if they destroyed that last hope. By the time the gates of Valenfort rose above the horizon, Elenia's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't seen the capital in over a year, not since Darius left. The walls were taller than she remembered, guarded by sentinels in glinting black armor. The city's spires pierced the sky like swords. It looked untouched by the suffering of the villages. Golden, pristine, deaf. The guards let them pass with a cold nod. Her name was still known, though now it was followed by murmurs. The Witch of the West Cliffs. The exiled healer. The woman who refused to disappear. The royal steward who met them at the gates wore a cloak too fine for the cold, his gloves trimmed with silver thread. He sniffed as he looked at her, then her children, then the cart. You were expected 3 days ago, he said. The rain, Elenia answered simply. He didn't nod, just turned on his heel. Follow me. Valenfort was a city of masks. The people who passed them on the road did not speak, but their eyes said everything. Curiosity, suspicion, even fear. Elenia kept her head high and walked with steady steps, even as her heart pounded like war drums in her chest. They led her not to the royal palace, but to a tower that loomed just behind it, narrow, tall, windowless until its upper floors. The Council Hall of Advancement and Research. Inside, the air smelled of oil, parchment, and polished stone. Cold, calculated, not a place for emotion or compassion. She was brought to a chamber lined with scholars, 12 in total, men in robes of dark blue, gold chains around their necks, scrolls clutched like weapons. At the center of them, in the seat of judgment, sat Darius. She froze. He wore the sigil of the crown on his chest. His dark hair was shorter now, neatly trimmed, and his robes shimmered with royal embroidery. He had gained weight. Power looked good on him, but his eyes were empty. For a long moment, no one spoke. Darius rose slowly. Lady Elenia, he said almost gently, or do you no longer use the name I gave you? She didn't blink. You didn't give it to me. I was born of House Dareth. He smirked, but his eyes twitched. I see you haven't lost your fire. I had to keep something, she said. You took everything else. A whisper ran through the chamber. One of the older councilmen cleared his throat. We are not here for theatrics, he said dryly. We are here to review a claim that a woman from the western provinces has created a curative process for high fever and lung disease with a success rate higher than the palace medics. Elenia stepped forward. I have not made a claim, she said, placing her device on the table. I have presented a solution. It works. I can prove it. Please do, the councilman said, folding his hands. She unrolled her parchment with steady hands, explaining the structure, the concept, the flow of pressure through copper tubing, the balance of temperature and timing. She spoke with clarity, with passion, with the kind of knowledge that can't be borrowed or stolen. When she finished, she looked directly at Darius. This is what you left behind, she said. Not a fantasy, not a failed marriage, a future. Darius didn't speak, but the silence that followed was heavy, too heavy. The head scholar leaned forward. This is highly irregular. Innovative, another said, half impressed, half skeptical. But there is no record of your schooling, no formal training, no patents. I didn't have access to institutions, she said, only to pain, and the will to stop it. A third councilman cleared his throat. And where is the child you claim to have cured? My son is here in the city. He can be examined. I have documented every step of the treatment. Convenient, someone muttered. She straightened her back. Truth doesn't need to be convenient. The debate stretched on. Words twisted. Some marveled. Others undermined. Darius remained silent through it all, watching with the blank expression of someone playing a very long game. At last, the council fell quiet, and then Darius stood. "I propose," he said, "that the device and formula be submitted for royal use, but ownership must belong to the crown. We cannot risk such knowledge being misused or distributed outside regulation." Alenia stared at him, stunned. "You want to take it?" He didn't flinch. "It belongs to the realm, not to the hands of one woman." "You mean not to the hands of this woman?" she said. A muscle in his jaw twitched. He didn't answer. She turned to the council. "If you take it and deny my name, my place in this, you're not saving lives. You're rewriting history, and you'll be remembered for that." A long pause. Then the eldest scholar, silent until now, finally spoke. "The law is clear," he said, "but sometimes the law forgets the soul of the land." He looked at her. "You are not like the others, Lady Alenia. You do not have their training, but you have done what they have not, and what the court has ignored too long." He turned to Darius. "Let it be entered into record. The design and formula belong to Alenia of House Dareth. She is to be credited and consulted in every future development." Darius stepped forward, furious. "You can't. She will be honored." The elder cut in. "Whether you like it or not." Alenia stood in stunned silence. For the first time since her exile, her voice had not been silenced. It had echoed, and the walls of Valenfort would never forget it. One by one, the councilmen slipped through the heavy oak doors, whispering among themselves, glancing back at Alenia with something between curiosity and disbelief. Some offered short nods. Others looked away. Only the eldest of them, the man who had spoken in her defense, paused at the exit. "You carry more than invention," he said quietly. "You carry reckoning." Then he was gone. Alenia stood frozen. The room felt colder now, even as the fire in her chest continued to burn, pulsing hot with every breath. Across the room, Darius still hadn't moved. He stood near the window, the sunlight pouring behind him in long golden threads. It framed him like a portrait, a man carved of marble and pride. She hated how familiar he still looked. She hated more that part of her still searched for something behind those eyes. "You played that well," he said finally, voice low, tight. Alenia blinked. "This wasn't a game." "To you, maybe not," he replied, turning slowly. "But in this world, everything is. And you just made a very dangerous move." "You mean I survived you?" she said. "That's what you can't stand." He stepped toward her. "You embarrassed me in front of the council. You questioned my authority." She met his gaze, her voice steady. "You don't have authority over me. Not anymore." A flash of something passed through his expression. Rage? Shame? She couldn't tell. It disappeared too quickly, replaced by that familiar mask of controlled superiority. "You think this changes anything? That they'll suddenly accept you? One old scholar gives you a crumb of praise and you believe the world has shifted." "It has," she said. "Not because of him, because I'm still here." Darius laughed once, bitter. "You're a mother with a few tricks and a miracle. That's all." "No," she said, stepping closer now, each word like steel through silk. "I'm a mother with a mind that terrified you. A woman you couldn't control, so you tried to erase me. But the only thing you erased was your place in your own children's hearts. That cut deeper than anything else could have." She saw it in his eyes, that tiny flicker of regret he tried to swallow. She turned to leave. "Alenia," she paused. He didn't speak for a long moment, and when he did, his voice was almost human. "I thought I was doing what was best. For me. For all of us." She didn't look at him. "You thought wrong." She left him in that chamber with only the echo of his ambition to keep him company. Outside, the wind was sharp, the sky wide and blue. The city hummed below, unaware that a quiet revolution had taken place in a single room behind palace walls. She walked through the cobblestone streets with her children at her side. Leyran held her hand tightly, Era skipped along the edge of the path, humming to herself. Little Elin slept against her chest. They reached the inn where they were staying, modest, tucked behind a bakery that smelled of warm honey bread. The innkeeper nodded at her. He'd heard. Everyone had. That evening, as the children rested, Elenia sat at the wooden desk by the window, writing. She didn't write formulas tonight. She wrote her name, over and over. Not Lady Elenia of House Dareth, not wife of Darius, just Elenia, mother, inventor, healer, survivor. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find a messenger, young, nervous, holding a scroll sealed not with red wax, but white, royal parchment. She broke it open with trembling fingers. The message was brief. His Majesty the King requests your presence at court tomorrow at sunrise. Your research shall be reviewed for royal implementation. A carriage will be sent. She stared at the letter, heart thudding. This was no counsel, no echo of Darius. This was the king himself, and that meant danger, opportunity, risk. Elenia closed the door softly, holding the letter to her chest. Behind her, Leyran stirred. Is something wrong, Mama? She turned. No, she said softly. Not wrong. She knelt beside him. But something big is coming. He reached for her hand. Will we go home after? She didn't know what home meant anymore. The cottage? The manor that no longer belonged to them? Or the future she was still trying to build? We'll go somewhere better, she whispered. Somewhere we choose. She kissed his forehead, then looked out the window at the night. Stars blinked above Valenfort, distant and watchful. She didn't sleep. She stayed up, sharpening her mind like a blade. Because tomorrow she would face a king, and she would not bow. Mist drifted through the narrow alleyways of Valenfort like forgotten prayers, curling against the cobblestones, clinging to every step Elenia took as she descended from the inn. Her children remained behind, still asleep, under Morella's watch. She had kissed each of them on the forehead before leaving, pressing her lips against their skin like a promise that no matter what happened in that palace, she would return. The carriage waiting for her was not adorned or extravagant. It was sleek, functional, bearing the white seal of the crown. 2 guards stood beside it, stone-faced. They didn't speak when she climbed in. They didn't meet her eyes. She clutched the bundle of papers in her lap like armor. Blueprints, notes, diagrams, proof of the life she'd rebuilt from ash. She didn't know what the king would want. She only knew what she would give. The ride was silent. When they arrived at the royal gates, she looked up at the palace. Taller than she remembered, suffocating in its beauty. It towered above the city like judgment carved from marble. A servant led her through the inner halls, past portraits of kings and queens long buried, past vases worth more than the cottage she now called home. The silence here was heavy, not like the silence of fear, but of control. And then the doors opened. She stepped into the throne chamber. The walls were gold-veined stone, the ceiling endless. And there, on the raised dais, seated in a throne of black wood and lion's mane, was King Aldrin IV. He was younger than she expected, no older than Darius, his features sharp, his presence commanding. Yet something about his eyes unsettled her. Not cruelty, not malice, just calculation. As if everything he saw, he measured. He did not rise. Elenia of House Dareth, he said, voice smooth as poured wine. You stand before me bearing knowledge that has rippled across my realm. Knowledge that, until recently, my court refused to acknowledge. Elenia's heart thudded, but her voice did not tremble. I stand before you as a mother who refused to let her child die. The king's mouth twitched. A noble beginning, but what you've built goes beyond desperation. The device is efficient, inexpensive, replicable. You've done what our best healers could not. She watched him carefully. I had to. They were never building for the poor. A murmur rippled through the nobles flanking the throne, seated in their curved line of velvet robes and smug smiles. One of them, a thick-jowled man with gold rings on every finger, leaned forward. She speaks like a revolutionary, I speak like someone who's seen death in the eyes of a child, she snapped. If that frightens you, then you should be. The king lifted his hand, and silence fell again. Tell me, Elenia, he said, leaning forward now. What is it you want? She hesitated. No one had asked her that in years. Not what she had, not what she'd lost, but what she wanted. She stepped forward, unfolding her papers slowly, carefully. I want every child in Eldoria to have access to what saved mine. I want my work protected, not stolen, not erased. I want women in villages to know that their minds are not curses. That knowledge isn't reserved for noblemen in towers. The room stiffened. Her words cracked like thunder in that golden cage. King Aldrin regarded her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he rose, and he descended the steps of the throne. Every eye followed him as he approached her, each step echoing like the toll of a bell. He stopped a few paces away. You would speak that plainly to a king? Yes, she replied, because if I don't, I'll be the next thing buried under these floors. There was a moment, brief and sharp, when he almost smiled. He took the papers from her hand, leafed through them with practiced fingers, and then he said something no one expected. You will be appointed to the Royal Division of Civil Advancement. Your work will be distributed throughout the provinces under your supervision. You will be given funding, assistance, a workshop. The nobles erupted. A woman in crimson robes stood abruptly. Your Majesty, she is not trained. She has no lineage. This is madness. She has results, the king said, without looking away from Elenia. And that is all that matters. You would let her speak for the crown? No, Aldrin said calmly. I would let her speak with it. He turned to her once more. There is a price for what I'm offering. You will remain within Valenfort's bounds. Your work will be shared. You will answer to me directly. Should you deviate, the consequences will be swift. Elenia held his gaze. And if I say no? The king's face did not change. Then your invention is seized, your name forgotten, and your children will grow up in the shadows of what could have been. The words were not cruel. They were simply truth. She looked down at the device still strapped to her belt. She thought of the fevered breath of her son, the women who had come to her door in secret, the lives already saved and the thousands still waiting. She looked back up. I accept. The king nodded once. The chamber broke into chaos behind them, nobles rising, arguing, protesting. But Elenia heard none of it. She only heard the beating of her own heart and the silence that followed when a door, a real door, finally opened. A door she had built with her bare hands. As she turned to leave, Aldrin said one more thing, almost as an afterthought. Your husband, he said, Darius. He came to me with a different story. One in which you were unstable, obsessed, a danger to the realm. Elenia didn't turn. Then I suppose, she said quietly. He was right. She walked out of the throne room with her head high, her footsteps quiet, but unshakable. Behind her, the palace watched. Ahead of her, history waited. Elenia was assigned chambers inside the old scholars' quarter, just beyond the palace gardens. A place once used for quiet study and now emptied for renovation. The stone walls were cracked, the windows stiff with dust. But to her, it was a palace of her own. She was given parchment, ink, tools, and most importantly, silence to work. The city whispered about her. Commoners praised her name. Nobles cursed it. She hadn't seen Darius again since the council chamber. Part of her expected him to appear, to find some new way to sink his claws back into what she had reclaimed. But the silence from him was louder than confrontation. She knew better than to trust it. And yet, she had little time for fear. She threw herself into her work. She redrew her diagrams. She simplified the distiller's design further, adapting it for village use, using wood and glass and pressed herbs easily grown on the edge of fields. Each improvement came at a cost. Each detail meant long hours bent over sketches while her children slept in a borrowed room nearby. But every hour spent on her knees at the workbench was a vow that no one would feel what she once had. Abandoned, unheard, powerless. Then came the letter. It arrived by royal courier, sealed in violet wax, the color of mourning. She hesitated as she opened it, her fingers growing cold before her eyes even found the first word. A sickness has spread in the southern region of the realm. The town of Halewick has fallen into panic. The local physicians have failed. The king orders your immediate travel. You are to take your device. You leave tonight. Her hands tightened around the parchment. Halewick, the village where her grandmother had once lived, where mothers sold bread in the square and horses outnumbered guards. It was not a place built for plague. She packed within the hour. Why are we leaving again? Era asked, sleepy, rubbing her eyes. Alenia wrapped a blanket around her daughter and knelt to tie Laran's boots. Because someone needs help, she said. And they asked us this time. Laran looked up at her. Are you scared? She paused. Yes, she admitted. But we go anyway. That's what courage means. They traveled by night under guard. The carriage was rough, the road rougher. The children huddled together, lulled by the rocking motion and the hum of their mother's voice. But Alenia did not sleep. She sat with her journal open, rereading every line she had written since that night in the cottage. The night Laran had burned with fever and everything changed. It was nearly dawn when they reached Halewick. What they saw broke her heart. The town was gray, not by nature but by fear. Smoke curled from chimneys, but no one stood in the streets. Doors were shut, windows sealed. The market square, once vibrant, lay silent and abandoned. They were met by a young healer, barely older than a boy, pale and trembling. They're in the chapel, he told her. We put the sick there. We didn't know what else to do. Alenia left the children at the inn, promising she'd return soon. She followed the healer through the empty streets, the soft echo of her boots haunting in the quiet. When they opened the chapel doors, the stench hit her like a wave. Sweat, blood, fear, desperation. Rows of cots lined the aisles. Dozens of villagers lay writhing, some too still to stir. A low moan filled the space, like grief-given voice. She moved through the room with a cloth pressed to her mouth, kneeling beside each patient, checking breath, pulse, the color of their skin. They were burning inside, just like Laran had, only now it was spreading faster. How long has it been like this? She asked. 5 days, the boy whispered. We thought it was just a bad cold. But then, he trailed off. Alenia didn't need the rest. She set up her equipment immediately, boiled water, separated the herbs, began distilling. Villagers watched from the doorway, faces etched with suspicion. Some whispered prayers. Others cursed under their breath. Why is she doing that? We need a priest, not a scholar. Black magic. That's what it is. I heard she made a pact with the king. She ignored them all. She didn't care what they called her. She only cared about the girl who wasn't breathing. She administered the first dose to a boy of 10. His mother screamed at her to stop, but Alenia held the child's mouth open gently, slowly easing the warm liquid down his throat. Then she waited. Every second was a stone in her chest. Finally, the boy coughed, then again. Then he vomited onto the floor, and with it, a thick, black phlegm that reeked of death. He began to cry, and Alenia let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. It worked. The healer stared at her in disbelief. What is that? A cure, she said, already mixing the next vial. Now help me. We don't have time. She worked until her hands bled. For 3 days and nights, she didn't sleep. She moved from cot to cot, delivering doses, rubbing chests, cooling foreheads, whispering comfort. She held a dying man's hand as he took his last breath, then turned to save the child beside him. She buried a girl whose heart had stopped before Alenia could reach her. She didn't cry, not until the last fever broke, and Halewick breathed again. The morning after the final dose, as the sun crept in through the stained glass, the villagers gathered outside the chapel. They waited in silence. When Alenia stepped out, pale and shaking, the healer lifted his voice. She saved them, he said. She saved all of us. The silence broke into thunderous applause. Some wept, some knelt. A few touched her hands as she passed, as if expecting to feel something holy. But Elenia didn't feel holy. She felt tired, empty, and somehow more alive than ever before. She returned to her children that night, collapsed into their arms, and whispered, "We did it. We did something no one thought we could." Leyran touched her cheek, confused. "Are you crying, Mama?" She smiled through the tears. "Yes, my heart, and it's the best feeling in the world." But even in that moment of peace, something inside her stirred, a whisper in the back of her mind. If Halewick had been struck, where would the next sickness rise? And how long before something or someone ensured her work was silenced again? It wasn't pride. It wasn't relief. It was fury. She stood at the edge of the palace courtyard as the king's appointed courier Reed allowed her report, marking it with the royal seal. Another successful mission, another plague stayed, another village saved. And yet, no changes were ordered. No mobilization of her invention to the outer regions. No formal announcement to the kingdom. No official documentation shared with the court of scholars. The crown had praised her privately, but publicly, she remained unspoken, a shadow behind the throne. That night, as she returned to the quarters the king had assigned her, she found a note waiting. Folded paper, no seal, no signature, just 5 words, scrawled in harsh, hurried ink. "They will not let you win." She stared at it for a long time. The candles flickered. Outside, rain tapped against the window panes like fingers. Her children slept in the next room, their breaths soft and even. But Elenia couldn't sleep. She paced. She read and reread the note. She turned over every name in her mind. Who could have sent it? Was it a warning? A threat? A plea? The next day, she went to the Royal Academy to present the new refinements to her device. Now lighter, able to run without fire by using the heat of compressed mineral ash. It could be built in any village using materials no more expensive than a loaf of bread. She carried it wrapped in cloth. When she reached the grand chamber, she expected silence. But what she found stopped her cold. Laughter, laughter, echoing off the marble pillars. Her blueprints were spread out across the table. Men in fine robes passed them between one another, scribbling, revising, altering the design. Not her name, not her words. At the center of it all stood Lord Heron, one of the king's appointed science advisors. He held her diagram in one hand and a glass of wine in the other. "I told you it was a crude tool," he said, "but with proper minds behind it, we've turned a village toy into something usable." Elenia stepped forward slowly, her voice slicing through the air. "Where is my name?" The room fell into silence. Lord Heron looked up. "Ah, the witch arrives. Don't call me that." He raised an eyebrow. "You come unannounced. You speak above your station. What would you prefer we call you?" She stepped closer. "My name is Elenia, the person whose work you've erased." One of the other men cleared his throat, suddenly uncomfortable. "Her original manuscript is here," he said, holding up a copy. "It's dated and stamped with the Healers Guild from Halewick." "She's not licensed," Heron interrupted. "Not trained. Her results are anecdotal." "They're alive," Elenia snapped. "The people in Halewick, the ones no one else could save, they're not anecdotes." The silence tightened around them like a noose. Elenia slowly unwrapped the updated device and placed it on the table. "Do any of your versions do this?" She twisted the copper valve. A slow pulse of blue steam curled from the top, perfectly measured, cooled by the new mineral chamber. Silent, safe, elegant. Heron said nothing. Elenia stared directly at him. "You don't care if it works. You care who's holding it." His face darkened. "You think this realm is built by truth? By fairness? This kingdom is built by order, Lady Elenia. And you, a woman, a mother, a widow, threaten that order every time you open your mouth." "I'm not a widow," she said quietly. He blinked. She leaned in, her voice cold. "I was abandoned. There's a difference." And then she gathered her device, turned on her heel, and left. She didn't stop walking until she reached the edge of the academy's gardens. The walls behind her, the whispers, the muttered threats, all dissolved into the wind. She sank onto a bench beneath a sycamore tree and let the fury rise until it burned her throat. Her hands trembled, her eyes burned, but she didn't cry. She couldn't afford to. Footsteps approached. She didn't look up. "You warned me, didn't you?" she said softly. The figure stopped beside her. She finally turned her head. It was a young woman, familiar. Sharp eyes, dark skin, hands calloused like someone who worked with tools, not paper. "You sent the note," Elenia said. The woman nodded. "They're not going to give you what you want," she said. "Not without taking everything first. Your name, your design, maybe even your children." Elenia's stomach turned. "Who are you?" The woman glanced around. "Name's Kale. Used to work in the archives. Was training under one of the royal engineers. Used to. They burned my project. Said it was too dangerous." She paused. "It was just a pulley system for irrigation." Elenia closed her eyes. "They take what threatens them." Kale crouched beside her now. "But I've been watching. What you're building, it's real. And I want in." Elenia stared at her. "You want to work with me?" "I want to fight with you. Because they're not going to stop until they bury your work so deep no one even remembers your name. But if we build something they can't ignore, if we train others, publish it outside the court, teach the villages to build it themselves." Kale smiled, sharp and dangerous. "They can't kill a fire already spreading." Elenia looked down at her hands. Worn, burned, scarred. And then at the sky, bleeding orange as the sun sank below the city. "No," she whispered. "They can't." She stood, and for the first time she didn't feel like she was fighting alone. Elenia didn't return to her quarters. Instead, she followed Kale through the narrow backstreets of the lower city. Places no royal courier would dare tread. Places filled with the scent of oil, iron, sweat, and quiet rebellion. The kind of places where truth didn't wear robes or crowns, but scars and soot. Kale led her to an abandoned workshop nestled between a blacksmith's forge and an alehouse. It had no windows, only one heavy door with iron hinges, and inside, the dust rose in thick layers. But the bones of the place were strong, and more importantly, it was untouched by the eyes of the court. "This is where we start," Kale said, lighting a lantern. "No stewards, no nobles, just tools and time." Elenia ran her fingers across the empty tables, the shelves stripped bare, the cracked stone floor. She could almost feel the heartbeat of invention pulsing in the silence. "We'll need copper, clay, animal hide, and skilled hands," she murmured. Kale pulled out a worn notebook. "There are blacksmiths loyal to the old guilds, women who sew leather with more precision than palace surgeons, farmers who know more about pressure valves than most of the king's engineers." Elenia looked up. "You've been planning this?" Kale gave a tight nod. "Waiting, watching for someone who could light the match." Elenia's breath caught in her chest. A single word rose in her mind, unspoken until now. Rebellion. Not with swords, not with fire, with knowledge. But before she could speak, there was a sharp knock at the door. Both women froze. Another knock, louder, then a voice. "Open, by order of the crown." Elenia's blood turned to ice. Kale's eyes darted toward the back. "There's a hatch. Basement. Go." Elenia didn't move. "I won't leave you. You have to. They don't know I'm helping you yet. But if they find us together..." The door slammed again, harder this time. Wood cracked. Kale shoved her toward the hatch, pulling open the old iron grate. "Go. Now." Elenia hesitated just long enough to squeeze her hand. "Don't lie for me unless you're ready to die for it." Kale smirked. "I thought we already were." Elenia dropped into darkness. The hatch slammed shut above her just as the door burst open. She crawled through the tunnel, damp stone pressing against her palms, her heart hammering in her ears. The only light came from the faint glow of a lantern ahead, placed exactly as Kale had described. When she emerged at the other end, into the alley behind the apothecary, She stood for a moment, shaking. Then she ran. She didn't stop until she reached the edge of the river. The water was dark, slow, reflecting the flicker of city torches like tiny dying stars. She doubled over, gasping, gripping the railing. A sudden voice broke the silence. "You always did run when cornered." She spun. Darius stood beside the bridge post, his cloak drawn close, his eyes catching the light like steel. She stared at him in disbelief. "What are you doing here?" "I followed you. After the academy." She narrowed her gaze. "What do you want?" He didn't answer right away, just stepped forward, slowly, like approaching a wounded animal. "You were always stubborn, Elenia, always reaching past the line. Is that what this is about?" She snapped. "You're angry I didn't stay in place? I'm trying to warn you. Warn me." Her voice cracked. "You let them tear my name from my own invention. You watched them steal my work and said nothing. And now you warn me. I didn't know they were going to. Don't lie to me." His jaw tightened. "I made mistakes," he said, quieter now. "But this path you're on, it's not glory. It's destruction." "You think I care about glory?" "No," he said. "But you have children. And if you keep going, they'll be the ones who pay." Her breath caught. There it was, the weapon he always saved for last. She stepped forward until they were inches apart. "If anything happens to them because of what I've done," she said, voice shaking with restrained fire, "it'll be because you left us defenseless. You gave up on us. Don't come here now and pretend to care." Darius swallowed. For a moment, he looked like a man unraveling. "I didn't know how to be less than you." The confession fell between them like a stone. "I married you thinking I was rescuing you from obscurity," he said. "And all this time, it was you lifting me." Elenia stared at him, stunned. "You don't get to say that now," she whispered. "Not after all the things you let them do, the lies you helped them spread." "I can fix it," he said suddenly. "If you stop this madness. Step back. Let the crown handle the invention. You'll be safe. Your children." She shook her head. "No, because if I step back now, then it was never mine to begin with." She turned away, her voice low. "And neither were you." She left him there, alone on the bridge, the wind tugging at his cloak like regret. By the time she returned to the inn, the sky was turning pale. Leiran was waiting at the door. His eyes searched her face. "Are you okay?" She knelt, pulled him into her arms. "I'm tired," she said, "but I'm not afraid." He held her tighter. Behind her, the city was stirring. Somewhere in the shadows, someone had tried to silence her, but it was too late. The fire was already spreading. Elenia remained in the safety of the inn with her children, but her mind had not known rest since the encounter on the bridge. She barely slept. Every creak of floorboards, every rustle of wind outside the shutters tightened a knot in her spine. Still, she refused to move them again. They had run too long. She sat by the hearth, parchment spread across the table, her device half disassembled in front of her. Her fingers moved with quiet desperation, rewiring the copper thread, adjusting the mineral chamber. The new version was nearly ready, faster, lighter, and no longer reliant on rare herbs. If it worked, it could be replicated in any village, any corner of the realm. But something in her gut twisted as she worked. It wasn't fear. It was urgency, the kind that came before a storm. A soft knock at the door startled her. She stood quickly, shielding the children with instinct, heart racing. Era stirred on the cot. Ilan pulled the latch slowly. Kale slipped inside, soaked from rain. "They arrested 2 of the old blacksmiths this morning," she said in a low voice, breathless. "Said they were harboring royal secrets." Elenia's blood ran cold. "They're calling the design a state asset now," Kale continued. "Not just the device, the knowledge itself. Anyone caught building it without permission is being accused of treason." Elenia's hands gripped the back of the chair to keep from trembling. "They're accelerating," she murmured. "They're trying to choke it before it spreads." Kale nodded grimly. "They don't want to own the cure. They want to contain it, control the demand." Choose who lives and who doesn't. Elenia looked toward the children, who slept, oblivious to the dark tide inching closer to their door. She turned back to Kale. We don't have time, do we? Kale's jaw tightened. No. If you want this knowledge free, it has to go out now. Elenia's mind raced. The villages, she whispered. The ones who helped me. The ones who watched it work with their own eyes. Kale met her gaze. We can reach them, but it has to be fast. Word is already spreading that you're no longer under the king's protection. Elenia swallowed hard. She had known this was coming. The moment she stepped out of that council chamber with her head high, she had declared war. Not with weapons, but with truth. And truth, to men like those behind the throne, was far more dangerous than rebellion. How many designs can we copy by nightfall? She asked. Kale pulled out a satchel. I've already started. We have runners, riders. Some work for merchants, others for the guilds. They're risking their lives. They believe in this. Elenia blinked, emotion choking her throat for a moment. They believe. It wasn't just her anymore. She moved to the desk, gathering every scrap of paper she had. Notes, diagrams, even the mistakes. She bound them in stacks, labeling each one by region. Take the first copies to Morella. She'll know who to trust. Then go to Halewick. If they speak, others will follow. Kale took them, nodded once, then hesitated. You sure you want to stay? Elenia looked down at her children. Yes, she said. They'll come for me, but I won't give them a reason to hurt anyone else. Kale didn't argue. She only pressed her hand to Elenia's shoulder. A quiet gesture, fierce and full of respect, and vanished into the storm again. The hours that followed passed slowly. The rain came harder, lashing against the windows like fists. Leyran stirred, then sat up on the cot, rubbing his eyes. Mama? He asked sleepily. She crossed the room quickly and knelt beside him. I'm here. He looked at her face for a long time, his brow furrowed. You look sad. She smiled faintly. I'm just tired. He reached for her hand, small and warm in her calloused palm. Did we do something bad? He asked quietly. Her heart shattered a little at the question. No, love, she whispered. We did something good. So good, it scared people who don't want the world to change. He looked down. Are we in danger? She hesitated, then pulled him close. Yes, she said softly. But we're not alone, and we're not afraid. There was another knock at the door. Not gentle this time, heavy, official. Elenia stood slowly. She pulled the children into the back room, kissed each of their heads, and whispered, Stay quiet, no matter what you hear. Then she returned to the front, set her shoulders, and opened the door. 2 royal guards stood in the rain, their armor shining like black mirrors. Elenia of House Dareth, one of them said. You are hereby ordered to appear before the Crown Council at sunrise. She held his gaze. Under what charge? The second guard stepped forward, holding out a sealed parchment. Unauthorized distribution of restricted knowledge. Undermining royal authority. Inciting civil instability. She didn't flinch. Do I come willingly? The first guard nodded. That would be preferable. She took the parchment, stepped back inside, and closed the door. Then she leaned against it, pressing her eyes shut. They were ready to silence her. But it was too late. The knowledge was already out. The blueprints were already riding through the rain, carried by hands that would not falter. And by the time the sun rose over Valenfort, the seed of revolution would already be buried in every corner of the realm. She stood at the mirror, her reflection a quiet storm. Every part of her body ached, from exhaustion, from fear, but her spirit, though cracked, had not broken. The parchment still lay on the table. The summons. She didn't touch it. Instead, she ran her fingers across the edge of her latest prototype, hidden beneath the floorboards. The last copy. Failsafe. If they took everything, if they burned her notes, tore her name from the records, this would remain. And someday someone would find it. A soft knock came at the door. She turned. It wasn't the guard this time. It was Kale, drenched, breathless. "They're changing the council location," she said in a rush. "It's not going to be in the royal chambers. They've moved it to the Hall of Records." Elenia blinked. "Why?" Kale shook her head. "It's not just a hearing, Elenia. They're turning it into a trial. Public. No defense. They're making you the example." Elenia's stomach dropped. "They're going to strip my name." "No," Kale said. "They're going to destroy it." Elenia's hands curled into fists. "I have to go," she said. Kale grabbed her arm. "If you step in there, you might not walk out." "I know." "Then why?" "Because if I run, they win," she said. "They'll say I admitted guilt, that I was ashamed, that what I did was wrong." Kale's voice broke. "And if you stay and they silence you..." Elenia looked her in the eyes. "Then let them try." The silence stretched. Then Kale stepped back, nodding, her jaw set with quiet fury. "I'll be watching," she said, "and so will others." Elenia closed the door gently behind her, and for the first time since she had returned to Valenfort, she didn't look back. The Hall of Records stood like a mausoleum at the edge of the palace. No banners, no music, just stone walls and the sound of rain tapping like whispers on the roof. Guards lined the aisle as she entered. Dozens of nobles were already seated in the upper gallery. Some whispered, others looked away. In the center stood a raised platform with 3 chairs, the Council of Moral Integrity, an archaic order rarely invoked. In the middle chair sat Lord Heron. Her breath caught. Darius was beside him. The third seat remained empty. The hall went silent as Elenia stepped forward. Her boots echoed across the stone floor like defiance made flesh. "Elenia of House Dareth," Heron's voice rang out, smooth and venom-laced. "You stand accused of disseminating restricted knowledge, disobeying royal protocol, and compromising the stability of the crown's authority. How do you plead?" She lifted her chin. "I plead for the truth." A ripple of laughter in the audience. Darius didn't smile. He didn't speak. He simply watched her, unreadable. "You created a device," Heron continued, "which you then distributed across the realm without royal oversight. I gave it to the people who needed it," she said. "That is not your decision to make." "No," she replied, her voice rising. "It was the right decision." Heron's eyes narrowed. "And now villages speak your name louder than they speak the king's. They call you savior, witch, rebel, and yet you stand here claiming innocence." "I stand here because no one else would." Darius finally spoke. "Elenia, don't do this." She turned sharply. "Don't what? Speak plainly? Say what you were too afraid to." He looked away. Heron stood. "You could have worked with us, been honored, protected, but instead you ignited disobedience, defiance." "I ignited hope," she snapped. "And you fear that more than you fear death." The room tensed. Heron's voice dropped. "You have one chance, Elenia. Renounce the design. Admit it was flawed. Sign it over to the crown, and your punishment will be light." She stared at him, then at the parchment laid before her. A blank space for her signature, for silence. Her name, her identity, erased by ink. She reached forward and tore it in half. Gasps echoed through the room. "I will not sign away the right to exist," she said, every word sharp and sure. "I built something that saved lives. You can't take that from me." Heron's mouth curled. "Then you leave us no choice." He raised a hand. Effective immediately, Elenia of House Dareth is to be stripped of title and name. Her work is declared property of the crown. Any future replication or mention of her authorship is forbidden under law. She is to be confined pending further sentence. Guards moved forward. The room spun, and then a voice rang out from the gallery. No, it was Kale. She stood, holding a scroll. "I have signed statements from the healers in Halewick, from Morella, from the villagers you ignored for years. If you bury her, you bury them." Another voice joined, then another. A blacksmith, a midwife, a merchant's son, all standing, all speaking. "This design saved my wife. She cured my child. She gave me back hope." The guards paused. Heron's face twisted in fury. Silence! But the room would not still. The voices rose. The people had seen the fire, and they would not let it be extinguished. Elenia stood tall as the guards froze mid-step, unsure now who held the power. She turned to Heron. "You asked if I would be silent." She smiled, softly, fiercely. "I think you have your answer." Elenia stood in the center, heart pounding, throat tight with emotion. Every breath she drew felt like a war cry. Around her, the people rose, from the back rows, the gallery, even the hallways beyond the doors. Not nobles, not lords, people. The ones she had built for, the ones she had healed. Heron's voice tried to rise above them. "Order, I demand." But it was too late. The tide had turned. A low murmur cut through the chaos as the final council seat, long left empty, creaked. The doors opened, and into the chamber walked King Aldrin. He wore no crown, no robe, only a simple dark coat, reins still clinging to the shoulders. His face was unreadable, eyes narrowed, jaw set. He moved past the guards with no announcement, and as he stepped to the center of the floor, the crowd fell into stunned silence. Even Heron took a step back. "My king," he stammered, bowing. We did not expect." "I know," Aldrin interrupted, calm and cold. "I was not meant to be told." He looked to Elenia. Their eyes met. She saw the calculation again, that sharp, unblinking awareness, but something else, too. Not warmth, not pity, recognition. He turned to the chamber. "Before me stands a woman who did what none of you dared," he said. "She faced illness, fear, and betrayal, and answered with creation." Heron's mouth twitched. "Your Majesty," she broke. "She broke nothing." Aldrin cut in. "She exposed everything." A hush spread like frost. He turned back to Elenia. "I gave you a place here once, as an experiment, a gesture." His voice was low, just for her. "But you turned it into something else." Her voice wavered, but held steady. "I didn't come here to impress you. I came to prove the people deserve more than silence." He nodded. "Then prove it again." A scribe stepped forward at the king's gesture, laying out a clean scroll. "You will write a public account of your invention," Aldrin said. "Every detail, every application. It will be copied, translated, and distributed across the realm under your name." Elenia stared, barely able to breathe. "You mean, I keep it? You share it," he said. "But as its creator, let no one question that again." Heron lunged forward, voice shaking. "This is madness. We cannot legitimize her like this. It will upend the structure." "That's the point," Aldrin replied coldly. "The structure is broken." He turned to the guards. "Lord Heron, for the willful suppression of life-saving knowledge, for conspiracy to defame and discredit a royal appointee, and for endangering the crown through deception, you are stripped of title and power effective immediately." Heron staggered. "You can't, you wouldn't." But Aldrin had already turned away. The guards seized him, dragging him from the chamber as his shouts echoed into nothing. And in the stunned silence that followed, Aldrin looked once more to Elenia. "You've won their voices," he said. "Now win their future." She stepped forward, hand trembling as she took the scribe's pen. "I don't write for power," she said, loud enough for all to hear. "I write for remembrance." And as the ink touched parchment, she did not hesitate. She wrote her name first, Elenia of House Dareth, a name nearly erased, now written where none could tear it down again. From the gallery, she heard Laran's small voice. "Mama!" She turned. He was standing beside Kale, who had brought the children quietly, carefully, through the back door. His eyes wide, not with fear, but wonder. Elenia crossed the hall in long, purposeful strides and dropped to her knees, pulling him into her arms. "I told you," she whispered, "we'd make something better." He nodded against her shoulder. "You did." Kale stepped forward, her voice low and urgent. "The provinces are watching, Elenia. This moment, it'll ripple." Elenia looked up, and for the first time she let herself believe it. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning, carried by messengers on horseback, hidden in bread loaves, stitched into the linings of robes. It reached villages that hadn't seen a healer in generations. It reached school teachers and carpenters, midwives and stonemasons, those who had never stepped foot inside the marble halls of Valenfort. And slowly they began to build. By their own hands, in hidden corners of barns and between market stalls, the device, her device, took form again and again. And each time it lit, each time it hissed and cured, Elenia's name was whispered with reverence. Not as a noble, not as a scientist, but as one of them. Still, within the stone walls of the capital, something colder stirred. It began with missing pages. Blueprints left overnight in her workshop vanished by morning. The ink in her newest journal turned to water. Kale noticed it first. She burst into the chamber one morning, breathless, holding a scorched corner of a page. They tried to burn the copies in the east wing. Elenia stared at it, eyes wide. Who? No one saw, but they got in and out without breaking the lock. She reached for the page, her heart thudding. It was one of her most recent, the revised filtration model for contaminated water. A new cure, a new promise. Now only ashes. We're being watched, Kale whispered. Someone still wants your name buried. Elenia felt it like a blade beneath her ribs. And that night she didn't sleep. Instead, she sat in the silent stillness of her quarters, the candlelight painting gold across her weary face, and began writing from memory. Every version, every formula, every correction, line by line, not on royal scrolls, not for the crown, but for the people. A knock shattered the silence. Not Kale, not a guard, a messenger boy, soaked in rain, eyes too wide for his face. He held out a small, sealed envelope. No wax, just rough twine. Elenia broke it open. Inside, just one line, Hailwick Burns. Her chest collapsed inward. No signature, no time, just that. She stood so quickly the chair toppled behind her. Kale, she shouted, already grabbing her cloak. Kale appeared in the doorway, sword at her side. What is it? They've set fire to Hailwick. No, Kale breathed. But we sent the device there. It was the first village. They believed. I have to go, Elenia said. I have to see. We don't know what's waiting. I don't care. Within the hour, they were on horseback, riding under cover of night. The rain blinding, the wind howling like a warning. Took 2 days. 2 days of thunder and mud. Of silence pierced only by the sound of hooves and the thoughts Elenia couldn't silence. What if they had destroyed it all? What if the people had been punished for daring to use what she had given them? What if she had failed? But when they reached the hill overlooking Hailwick, the breath caught in her throat. Smoke still curled from a few rooftops. The church bell had fallen, half-crushed near the square. But the people were there, tired, dirt-covered, eyes red from smoke, but alive. And gathered in the center of the market square was the device. Scorched, bent, but still intact, still humming. She dismounted before the horse had stopped moving. Her boots hit the ground hard, sending up sprays of mud as she ran. A man stepped forward to meet her. The village healer, his arm bandaged, his face streaked with soot. You came, he said, voice hoarse. What happened? She asked, grabbing his shoulders. Soldiers, he said. They came at night. Said we were practicing forbidden knowledge. Set fire to the clinic, the school. We fought back, with sticks, stones, whatever we had. And this, she pointed to the device. They tried to destroy it, but it wouldn't break. Kept running, like it knew it was needed. Elenia knelt beside it, tears burning her eyes. The edges were melted, the copper warped, but it had done its job. It saved 3 children, the healer added softly, even as the fire burned. Kale stood behind her, silent, gaze scanning the ruined square. They're not going to stop, Kale said. Not until they've crushed every village that touches your work. Elenia stood slowly, turned to the crowd gathering behind her. Mothers, fathers, children. ash-covered, bruised, but watching her with quiet defiance. "They tried to destroy what we built," she said, her voice rising. "But they failed." A murmur. "They thought fire would silence you." More voices now, closer. "But the cure lives here." She pointed to her chest, then to the healer. "Here, in all of you, you are the revolution now." A woman stepped forward, carrying a bundle wrapped in cloth. "We saved what we could," she said. "Blueprints, letters. We hid them in the well." Elenia took them gently, clutching them to her heart. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat by the device as villagers fed her warm broth and told her what they'd seen. How the guards had marked them as traitors, how they'd resisted. How a young boy had shielded the device with his own body until the flames died. She held his hand. He was 10. His name was Milo. He had burn scars on his arms. But he smiled. "You built it," he whispered. She brushed the hair from his face. "No," she said. "We did." And in the distance, beyond the horizon, she saw the lights of other villages. Waiting, learning. Elenia sat beside Milo as he slept, his arms wrapped in clean linen now, the scent of balm clinging to his skin. He hadn't stirred since before dawn, and each shallow breath felt like a thread she didn't dare pull too tight. Kale sat nearby, her sword unsheathed and resting across her knees. She hadn't spoken much since the night before. Her silence wasn't fear, it was a storm being held in by force. Footsteps approached. Elenia looked up to see the village healer return, holding a folded cloth. "They left this behind," he said, his voice low. Elenia opened it and froze. Inside was a black iron seal, not from the palace, but from the crown's secret division of enforcement. The Order of Silence. Kale stood sharply. "They sent them?" Elenia's fingers gripped the cloth. "They've stopped using guards," she whispered. "They've sent hunters." Kale's eyes darkened. "Then Halewick won't be the last." She turned to the healer. "How many villages have received the designs so far?" 7. Maybe more. They passed the copies between traveling merchants, disguised in packages or stitched into coats. "We need to warn them," Kale said. "No," Elenia said firmly. "We need to protect them." Kale blinked. "How?" Elenia rose slowly, her back aching, her throat dry from smoke and sleeplessness. "We give them more than blueprints. We give them knowledge. Teach them how to build, how to repair. We don't just send a device. We send understanding." Kale's brows furrowed. "That'll take time." Elenia looked down at Milo's bandaged hands. "Then we start now." They spent the next 2 days writing by candlelight. Elenia created illustrated manuals, handwritten instructions that even those who'd never held a scroll could understand. Diagrams, safety notes, lists of alternatives for materials. Simple, clear, universal. Each packet was sealed with her mark. A symbol Kale had carved herself. A flame wrapped in a circle. A fire no longer alone. On the 3rd morning, Kale returned from the edge of the forest with news. A messenger from the southern coast arrived. He came through the night. His face was bloodied. He said their village built the device, and 2 nights later, every structure was set ablaze. They're saying the Order is using tracking. They're marking places that send letters, that use couriers. Elenia's heart sank. They're watching the network. He said they burned the healer's home first. Elenia turned her face toward the window. The wind rattled the shutters. Her stomach twisted. "I started this," she whispered. "You started hope," Kale corrected. "And now they're killing for it." Kale placed a hand on her shoulder. "So we fight harder." Elenia turned slowly. "Not with weapons, with visibility." Kale's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "They strike in the dark. They win through silence. But if we go public, truly public, they lose control of the narrative. If everyone sees us, hears us, then they can't unmake what's been seen." Kale hesitated. "You want to make a declaration?" "I want to make a reckoning." Elenia walked to her satchel, pulled free the final set of blueprints, the version never shown to the court. A universal purifier, not just for fever, but for tainted water, poisoned air, disease they hadn't even faced yet. We send this to every province, with our names on it, with the story, with the truth. Kale's mouth parted. They'll come for us, with everything they have. Elenia looked out the window, toward the village where smoke still clung to the rooftops like a warning. They're already coming. A quiet cough interrupted them. Elenia turned. Milo was awake. His eyes fluttered open, his voice thin. Mama? The word struck her like an arrow, sharp and soft. I'm not your mama, she said gently, kneeling by his bed. But I'll stay until yours comes. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Don't let them break it, he whispered. I won't. Not ever. She tucked the blanket around his shoulders, her heart tight in her chest. Outside, riders were already saddling their horses, and in every direction, the wind carried her name, in whispers, in songs, in hidden corners of the realm. Elenia, the woman who made the flame that refused to die. Inside the healer's house, Elenia lit another candle and sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting through the final stack of diagrams. Her hands were ink-stained, her fingertips burned from sealing wax, her shoulders stiff, but she kept moving. If she stopped, even for a breath, the fear would catch up. Kale paced across the room behind her, sword in hand, her expression darker than the sky outside. Riders spotted near the ridge, she said. Same crest, the order of silence. Elenia didn't look up. How many? Too many to guess and not enough to send a battalion. Kale's jaw clenched. They're watching, waiting. They want you to run. Elenia smoothed out a wrinkled corner of parchment and spoke softly. I'm done running. Kale knelt beside her, dropping her voice. We can hide you, take you east. You could vanish for a year. Let the fire spread without you. No, Elenia said. They're not afraid of the device anymore. They're afraid of the woman behind it. If I disappear, they win. Kale stared at her for a moment, then shook her head slowly. You're either the bravest person I've ever met, she muttered, or the most stubborn. Elenia allowed herself a small, tired smile. Maybe both. Suddenly, a soft knock at the back door. Kale tensed, rising in a blink, blade in hand. She moved silently through the room and eased the door open a sliver, then relaxed. It's Leyran. Elenia stood quickly, crossing the floor as Kale opened the door wider. Leyran stood there soaked, panting, his face pale. Leyran, what happened? You should be with Era and... They're fine, he gasped. But someone's in the village, asking for you. Elenia's heart skipped. Who? He shook his head. A man, alone, covered in black. He's not like the others. Kale's eyes narrowed. Order. Leyran's voice trembled. He's not wearing a crest, but he's not hiding, just standing in the square, waiting. Elenia grabbed her cloak. I'm going. Kale blocked the door. Absolutely not. Kale, you don't walk into a trap. Leyran looked between them. He said he won't leave until he speaks to her. Kale turned to the boy. Did he say a name? Leyran nodded slowly. Darius. Elenia went still. For a moment, the sound of the storm outside vanished. All she could hear was her own breath, tight and shallow. She stepped around Kale. No, Kale said firmly. You don't owe him this. But Elenia was already moving. By the time she reached the square, the rain had soaked through her boots and chilled her bones. The wind pulled at her cloak like pleading fingers. The village was deathly quiet. Only the lanterns lining the path flickered, dim halos against the fog. And there, in the center of it all, stood Darius. He wasn't dressed as a noble. No armor, no velvet, just a dark coat soaked through, his shoulders hunched, his face gaunt, older than it should have been. She stopped several paces away, her hands clenched. You shouldn't be here, she said. He looked at her with something between awe and guilt. I had to see it, he said, with my own eyes. The village, the people, they speak your name like it's a prayer. It's not a prayer, she snapped. It's a wound they won't let scar. He swallowed. I never meant for it to come to this. Yes, you did, she said. You didn't light the match, Darius, but you stood there with oil in your hands. He flinched. I didn't come to fight, he said. I came to warn you. Elenia took a breath. They're coming, I know. They've already been here. No, he said, his voice breaking. This time it's different. They've stopped targeting villages.